Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on December 16th, 2024. I'm pleased to be joined today by my friend and journalistic colleague from Beirut, Lebanon, Laith Marouf. Laith is a geopolitical commentator and the executive director of Free Palestine TV, which has been doing extraordinary work under very difficult circumstances during this time of genocide. Thank you so much for joining me again today, Laith.
Good to be with you, Dimitri.
So, Laith, I'd like to focus our discussion today on the terrible events in Syria and also talk about Lebanon, Palestine, and Iran. But before I do that, I want to share some background information with our audience, which they may not know. Much of what I'm about to say, they definitely won't know. First of all, I want to point out to our audience, and I invite you to elaborate upon this when I complete my preliminary observations, but you are Palestinian and Syrian origin, and you have deep connections to both countries, both societies, and I know for reasons I'm about to elaborate how very much Syria means to you. And the part that I've never shared with anybody, I just haven't had an occasion to do it, is that the first time I went to Lebanon was in early 2023. And at that time, you and I had, I think, met each other face to face once. We were both invited to a dinner in Montreal at the time when you were still residing there. And then when I came to Lebanon, as I recall, you learned from my social media commentary that I was in the country. You invited me out to dinner in Beirut. We had a lovely dinner. I got to know you better. And then you learned while I was on that trip that I had arranged to visit Damascus through my fixers, who were Lebanese Canadian journalists living in Beirut. And what they arranged, it was really what they suggested I do under the circumstances, was take a drive with a driver from Beirut to Damascus and spend a day in the city of Damascus and going to various locations that I was particularly interested in visiting, and then returning later that night. And when you learned of this, you asked me if I had an extra seat in my car. I was happy for you to accompany me, and we spent the day together in Damascus. And that was the one and only time that I ever saw Syria, anything of Syria. And I have to tell you, Laith, that I am deeply saddened by what has happened, not because I bemoan the departure of Bashar al-Assad, but because the country has been delivered into the hands of bloodthirsty terrorist proxies of the United States, Israel, and Turkey, and it is in the process of being dismembered. And I find it extremely difficult to celebrate the idea that the cure is worse than the sickness, because that's precisely what people seem to be celebrating right now, in my opinion. In any event, why don't you tell us, Laith, if you want to talk some more about your ties to Syria, please do that. But what are your overall feelings about what is happening now in the country?
Yeah, I mean, I am a Syrian citizen. I mean, there is no such thing as Syria anymore. But my father's family, the Marouf family, are from Deir ez-Zor, Syria. They're originally from Iraq 100 somewhat years before. We're part of the Buhani clan that is part of the Mashahida tribe. That is, their name comes from al-Mashahida, means the witnesses, the ones that witnessed the martyrdom of Hussein. So my father's family are part of the Al al-Bayt, meaning the people of the house of Muhammad. And so is my mother's family, the Kilani, from Palestine. They're originally also from Iraq, and the Sheikh Abdul Qadir Kilani has a huge tomb in Baghdad. He is like one of the anchors of Sunni Islam. So on both sides of my blood lineage, I am a part of the Prophet's family. And Deir ez-Zor, the Marouf and Arfi family, my great uncle was the Mufti, the religious judge, basically, of all of the Jazeera area, the area between the rivers, the two rivers during the Ottoman time, and eventually became the Mufti of Deir ez-Zor during the foundation of Syria. And the Marouf al-Narfi family led the rebellion, the first rebellion against the French occupation in 1917, and declared the independence of Syria and fought for this independence here for 6 months in Deir ez-Zor before it was captured by the French. I say these things because also people need to understand, for me and for much of the people of the region that we may call in English the Levant or Bilad al-Sham in Arabic, are all one place. I was born in Amman, Jordan, and my mother was born in South Lebanon in Bint Jbeil in 1948 as my grandmother arrived after their expulsion on April 22nd, 1948 from Haifa. So for me, this is all my land and my people's land, and it's all one. And Syria, as we know it, as a state that was created after the end of World War I, is not the Syria that I speak of. Syria is all of this, Bilad al-Sham for me, from Palestine to Iraq and everything in between. The fall of Damascus a few days ago, now a week, I think will be remembered historically as the kind of reincarnation, deja vu moment of the fall of Damascus to the Mongol hordes and the fall of Syria in general to the Crusaders simultaneously. This is what happened 1,000 years ago, and this is what is happening right now. The Mongol hordes and the Crusaders, or the Crusaders of our time, are eating up Bilad al-Sham, Greater Syria, the geographic Syria, and they are actually conducting exactly the same campaign that happened 1,000 years ago. The Mongol hordes burnt Baghdad, burnt Aleppo down to the ground, made mountains of skulls, and turned the rivers Euphrates and Tigris into red and black as they burned the libraries of Baghdad and threw them into the river, and the river turned black from the ink. And the Crusaders cannibalized people in Ma'arrat al-Nu'man, and this is a very important historical moment when the Crusaders arrived into Ma'arrat al-Nu'man in Idlib, and the city surrendered, and they ended up 3 days cannibalism orgy of eating everything and everybody that's alive. This is what we see repeating today, literally for the last 20 somewhat years. The region of Bilad al-Sham has fell to the curse of a new Mongol Turkic horde led by Turkey with the Wahhabi death squads, and at the same time the 1-2 punch of the Crusaders from Palestine that are running wild and killing children on live television by the hundreds for the last 14 months. This is the reality, and although it's a very sad day, the burning down of Baghdad, Aleppo, and the besiegement, the destruction of Damascus and Jerusalem and Akka and Haifa 1,000 years ago didn't mean the end of the resistance to these invaders, didn't mean the end of Syrian culture, Arabic people's culture in general, and only foretold the end of those empires, as we saw later on. So we're reliving a deja vu moment 1,000 years later, and the same ailments that led to the fall of Baghdad and Damascus 1,000 years ago to the Mongol hordes and the Crusader hordes, which was the internal squabbling between the Arabic peoples, are again the same reason for the fall of today's Damascus and before it Baghdad.
Talk to us about this character, Al-Julani, and HTS. And I just want to say, Laith, for the benefit of our audience, that according to the US government, this is an organization that has engaged in rape, torture, and extrajudicial assassinations, including beheadings. You can go to the State Department website and see these documented atrocities referred to. The Canadian government on its website, it too regards HTS as a terrorist organization, points out that HTS is fond of using suicide bombings. And one in Damascus, it says, the Canadian government killed 72 people, including 8 children. I believe this was back in 2017, 2018. And of course, we're now being told that Al-Julani on his way to Damascus underwent transformation, which I find utterly laughable. But even if we assume for the sake of argument that that's true, when did the West ever give terrorists a free pass because suddenly they woke up one day and found that they had a conscience? Whatever happened to the idea that people should be held accountable for their heinous crimes? Is it as simple as that? Do we simply have to say, you know what, we've decided to be inclusive and democratic from this day forward, so my slate should be wiped clean? That appears to be the new philosophy of Western governments. But I listened to you recently give last night actually, a very interesting account of who this Al-Julani character is. Could you tell us what you know about him and about this organization that he runs?
Well, obviously, he was the second in command of the Islamic State before it became ISIS in Iraq, before it included Syria in its name, the second to Zarqawi, the Jordanian. And then he was captured and was in Abu Ghraib in Iraq,
where the U.S. Army committed documented war crimes, torture, and so forth. Yes, right.
And somehow still ended up becoming, and this should tell anybody what does that mean, the second to al-Baghdadi, the head of the new ISIS when ISIS was founded. So clearly all of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, all of those things are American intelligence manufactured entities. And I like to call them all as chameleon contras that just change. And he's the best example of that. Just change their fatigue or the patch on their shoulder and their new thing, according to what master wants. And he flipped again to, as ISIS was collapsing, into Al-Qaeda in Syria, and was given the blessing of the head of Al-Qaeda, the Egyptian leader who's in Afghanistan somewhere. And, eventually rebranded from Al-Qaeda Syria to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, meaning the Committee for the Liberation of Sham area, Bilad al-Sham, Greater Syria region. And so he is responsible, of course, for atrocities across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, because all the terrorism campaign in Lebanon during the 2010s was, according to the Lebanese government and the intelligence and the people that they caught and put in jail for those terrorist explosions across Lebanon, was all ordered directly by Al-Julani. Now, he's being rebranded even more now, one more time, and now we're having a name change to him. And suddenly they're calling him, instead of Muhammad al-Julani, which was also a fabricated name, because al-Julani means the one from the Golan. And he is not from the Golan. And the emphasis on the word Golan was always to make a pretend by the Americans that he has some intention to liberate the Golan Heights, okay, as a Islamist, whatever, militia leader. And now that they have decided that they're not going to liberate the Golan Heights and, in fact, give more of Syria to the Israelis, and Israel has already now occupied, since the collapse of the government in Syria, a larger chunk of Syria than what it occupied in 1967. Right now, Israel is occupying a bigger part of Syria than the occupied Golan Heights. And it's now the territory that it occupies out of Syria, both the Golan Heights and the new territory that it occupies, is larger than the West Bank and Gaza combined. Okay, so now that they decided he's not going to be liberating the Golan Heights and they want to bury this story, they decided to make up a new name for him. And now his name, according to the Al Jazeera, the propaganda arm of the United States, the Arabic world, is Ahmed Al-Shara. And the reason now they use this name Al-Shara is because this is one of the largest families in Daraa region, in the Hawran region of North Jordan, South Syria, and has produced a lot of leaders in Arabic thought over the centuries. And one of their last most important names in the Syria as a whole, in the Syrian conflict, and is in Arabic politics over the last century, has been former vice president of Syria, the former foreign affairs minister of Syria, also Farouk al-Shara. And some of our viewers may remember that Farouk al-Shara was the vice president when the beginnings of the troubles in Syria happened. And he was from Daraa, where supposedly the spark of the troubles started. And he tried to negotiate a end of hostilities or something. And when he saw that there's no way this country is gonna be able to solve these problems, and him and the older generation, he stepped down as vice president of Syria while refusing to leave the country and retired from political life. And so he's remembered as somebody who never got involved in business ventures. He has zero money, zero houses and palaces and nothing. And plus, he was the most important foreign affairs minister in the history of the Arabic world since the end of World War II. Some of their viewers, if they want to look, they can see his thrashing of Israel Shamir, the former prime minister of Israel, during the Madrid negotiations. Farouk al-Shara, there's videos out of there. You can watch his speech. It's still even on PBS for some reason. It's one of the most amazing speeches of an Arab foreign affairs minister. Point is, they wanted to take the name of al-Shara because of the love that there is for him in the streets of Syria, and now imbue it to this Saudi, and Muhammad Julani is a Saudi citizen, not a Syrian, make him into a Syrian citizen from one of the most honorable families in the country.
Mm. Now, it does appear that despite the fact of this character having assumed power in what remains of Syria, or at least assuming the face of power, who actually exercises power is another question. There do appear to be a considerable number of Syrians who are celebrating these events. We've seen images of them in the streets. We hear their voices on social media. I myself have been criticized on social media by 2 or 3 people who claim to be Syrian. I don't know if they in fact are. I assume they are, because I have expressed sadness at what has befallen Syria. What do you say to the Syrians, your fellow Syrians who are celebrating this moment? And what is your overall assessment of Bashar al-Assad?
Okay, well, of course, there's the lessons of history that are very near to us. We can see how the Libyans regret the day that the Americans occupied their country and brought those tools and took down Muammar Gaddafi. We also see how the Iraqis also say their prayers almost every day for Saddam Hussein. But I don't want to compare those two to Bashar al-Assad either. You know, there is a primary contradiction, which is the imperialist plots, constant plots to make Syria part of their domain for the last 80 years. This primary contradiction, the fact that Syria had, lived at least one major war every 10 years since 1942, and also has lived 8 coup attempts under American and French and Israeli planning over that period between 1942 and 1970 and the coming of the Ba'ath Party. This material condition could bring out only 2 kinds of states. Okay, one can be a total.
When you say material condition, you're referring to the constant attempts to overthrow the government in Syria, the coups and so forth, right?
The coups, constant war, and the non-stop sanctions. Syria has been under sanctions since 1942, actually.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's only 2 possibilities to come out from this. Either you bow down and you become another tool state like the rest of the Arabic world, and or if you want to survive as a sovereign, you will become a police intelligence state. There's no way a country like Syria can survive with all these plots on without having to basically become an intelligence state. And that's what naturally happened. This is not that, I love this kind of government, but what other government, but brutal in terms of its intelligence work, can survive in such condition, especially with the whole empire and all of its, vessels utilizing all their intelligence and military and propaganda against such a country. So it's a natural outcome. Nobody can right now look at the other natural outcome. You see, the other choice is the Julani, is the King Hussein's, is the Sisi's, that will continue to be dictators, torturers, killers, looters, corrupt, but they're under the tutelage of the empire, so they stay in power. Okay? So what do people expect? Are we children? Do we live in a utopia? The United States hosts 25% of the incarcerated population on this planet. It's through all of human history, nobody has jailed more people than the United States. All of humanity's history. There's 3 times more people in jails being raped and killed and getting AIDS and tortured and not giving any medical care in the United States. 3 times more than the prison population in China, which is 5 times the population of the United States. So anyone that is stupid enough to believe that the Syrian people will receive democracy and human rights before the American gets those. Canadians don't have democracy or human rights.
Nope.
How am I stupid enough to think under these conditions of global imperial hegemony, I, with the gun of the Americans and the air force of the Israelis and the bombardments of the Turks, will have democracy under these conditions and human rights.
I,
The Syrian
I,
people.
I must add just this thought, Laith. No one will be surprised to hear me say I completely concur with your assessment, but let's just look at West Asia, okay? Now virtually every government, other than Iran and Yemen, which arguably doesn't really have a functioning government. Assads doesn't control much of the country, thanks to the Saudis and the Americans. But virtually every government is a vassal of the United States. And none of them is a democracy. None of them even really pretends to be a democracy. Look at Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, Jordan, Egypt, Kuwait, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, you name it. I mean, these people aren't even really pretending to be democracies. Why anyone would think that the United States is suddenly going to deliver democracy to the Syrian people when it has refused, violently blocked the development of democracy in every other country in West Asia is absolutely mind-boggling, mind-boggling. You don't even have to look beyond the borders of West Asia, for example, to the enormous prison population of the United States to understand what the reality of what the Syrian people are confronting now. I'm sad to say.
Yeah, and remember when we went in that visit to Damascus and we walked in the old city, remember how there was all these different little mosques, each one of them belonging to a different sect, with their massive libraries beside them, historical archives. Okay. So Damascus had the archive of the Muslim world, basically, and the foundations of these sects. And now that's all being looted. There's, videos all around people can watch, of course, of, specifically the Sufis, the mystics, getting their mosques raided and their imams beaten up. And, there's right now a darkness falling on Damascus and in Syria in general, and the situation is really bad. What we see right now is only media coming out from the propaganda of the imperialist. There's no independent journalists on the ground, nobody with any only somebody with a wish, death wish would go right now, who is critical and or independent, really, not imperialist. The churches are not allowed to hold Christmas. There's no Christmas decoration anywhere in the oldest Christian communities in the world and the oldest churches in the world. They're not allowed to hold Christmas and or Sunday Mass. Okay. And the Israeli media is live in the streets of Damascus, just driving from the Golan Heights as they wish. They can drive anywhere and go live from the streets of Damascus. So it's not like that there is no courage, courage to fight the Israelis on the border where they're occupying. And there is nobody even that has the guts to do anything to an Israeli infiltrator that entered the country illegally as a journalist and is broadcasting with Hebrew from the middle of Damascus.
Wow. So I also remember, the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus was one of the most extraordinary.
What are they going to do with the head of John the Baptist? The head of John the Baptist is in the heart of the Umayyad Mosque. Remember, we prayed at it, me and you. The head of Hussein is in the Umayyad Mosque. Are these fanatics gonna rip them out? What are the Christians that call themselves Christians doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk to you now about Turkey. and its intentions. From my perspective, Laith, Turkey effectively, I'll be crude, saved Netanyahu's ass, because at the very moment when it was obvious to the whole world that the genocidal military of Israel was not able to occupy and control South Lebanon after weeks of bloody warfare and pummeling the civilian population of Lebanon relentlessly from the air, at the very moment when the elite Golani Brigade was being commanded to withdraw from South Lebanon because of the beating it had sustained, the Turkish-backed extremists emerged from Idlib and quickly made short work of the Syrian military before seizing Damascus. And now they have cut off, for the time being at least, the flow of weapons by land from Iran through Iraq and Syria to the Islamic resistance in Lebanon. You couldn't have done a bigger favor for Netanyahu, it seems to me. So this character Erdogan, who has been shooting his mouth off, flapping his gums endlessly about Israel's crimes, not only saved Netanyahu's ass at a moment of really when it was on the precipice of a strategic defeat, in my opinion, but also has continued throughout this period to supply oil to the Zionist entity, without which it cannot operate its war machine. What do you say about, what do you believe Erdogan's actual objectives are here?
Well, he's trying to revive both the Ottoman Empire and the Mongol Khanate simultaneously. Okay? So on the one hand, he wants to reoccupy Greater Syria and expand into the rest of the Arabic world. On the other, he wants to go east and capture all the Turkic former Soviet states all the way to Xinjiang, where the quote-unquote Uyghurs are. So, and this, the United States has promised him that he will be appointed as both the Ottoman Caliph and the new Khan, a Mongol Genghis Khan kind of situation. And unfortunately, both China and Russia have repeated the same mistake they did, well, at least less China so, but more so Russia, the same mistake that the Soviets did during the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the Arabic world. Because they still didn't break their relations with the Israelis and played this game. And because the fear, actually, this is the main issue that why the Arabs have no choice but to go by themselves on this path of liberation. Because China and Russia and any other power on this planet knows that if the Arabic people are united and that the Arabic territories are united, then you lose your possibility to project power from the peripheries. And, so because of geography, if the Arabic world is united, as it was, let's say, during the Umayyad time, then the powers that are at the periphery, Europe, China, will lose. And the center becomes the power. So because of that fear of even the rise of a mini Arab unification, the Soviets, for instance, worked against Jamal Abdel Nasser and his unification of the Arabic people, his project of third worldism. Okay. And that actually led to the fall of the Soviet Union because they didn't want the rise of Arabic countries united. Similarly, right now, Russia didn't want an axis of resistance that could control actually this area by defeating the Zionists and the Americans, because then they will have to negotiate on a equal table with the axis of resistance. And they played this game. In 2016, the Syrian army, the Hezbollah, the Iranians were almost going to liberate all of Idlib. It was Russian intervention that stopped that from happening. We wouldn't have had to deal with today or last week these Wahhabi death squads if they were dealt with in 2016, if the Russians didn't stop it. Similarly, right now, the Chinese are going to regret the day that the Uyghur fighters are roaming free right now in Syria and are going to come back with weapons to attack them because they didn't deal with it in Syria, because the Chinese at least were still thinking about this. I don't intervene in internal affairs. Well, it's going to come and bite you in your own territory because you let it fester there and you didn't deal with imperialist plot there. Mm-hmm. Turkey, it's expected, but Russia will regret the day that Damascus fell.
Now, Assad just this morning put out a statement. It's interesting to read I saw the actual complete statement on social media, but just before we began this interview, I tried to find the statement. I found it on my iPhone, and I tried to find the statement on my laptop, and all I found were all of these Western media reports, none of which actually reproduced the statement. So I went through 10 different, where's the statement? They were just taking little snippets and so forth. I'd like your thoughts on this statement, and particularly this, Assad is now saying he's apparently broken his silence since the Russians announced that he had arrived in Moscow. He is saying that he was in Damascus until just before the fall of Damascus. And then because I think of drone attacks on the city, the Russians urged him to come to one of their military bases. And then when it became clear that the government was going to fall, Damascus would be seized, the Russians urged Assad to get on a plane and go to Moscow. But he claims that he wanted to fight to the bitter end and did not leave the country until it was absolutely clear that all was lost. What do you make of his statement? Do you believe it? And whether you do or do not believe it, what really stands out for you from this statement?
I think it's clear that the Russians are worried about already the public image in the Arabic world, in the axis of resistance, in the whole emerging third world multipolarity, whatever you want to call it, because of what they did. I doubt that this is a statement by former President Assad. They would have maybe put a video or something or an audio if it was really. In my opinion, President Assad stood by the Syrian people and the Lebanese people and the Palestinian people since his coming into power in 2000 under tremendous pressures, was offered multiple times by Condoleezza Rice in 2004 and again by the Qataris and the Saudis and the Turks and the Americans in 2012, and again in just a few months ago, offered billions of dollars, offered full, pardon for any crimes they may have accused him of all this time. If he gives up on Palestine, and he gives up on the Lebanese resistance and the axis of resistance and the sovereignty of Syria in general. And every time he refused it. So I don't see this man as a man that sells out his country and or just like that hands it over or orders the military to disband, as has happened. So in my opinion, and from the sources that I understand and from the record that is out there for us all, 4 days before the attack on Aleppo, the Russian media announced that President Assad is in Moscow on a state visit under the invitation of President Putin. His family was with him. And that was the last day we ever heard any media about him until this letter that we see today. So it is clear that President Assad was brought to Moscow, and as he was there, got already dethroned before the attack on Aleppo, and the Russians made a deal with Turkey and Israel to cut up basically the country in return for Turkey and the West in general giving President Putin the regions of Ukraine that he's occupying. This is the deal that Trump is coming to do. Trump wants to continue the war in the West Asia region. We may see Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen being attacked even before him coming. And eventually, Trump wants to attack Iran. So the deal is Russia withdraws from Syria. They leave it alone in Ukraine. And as we see, the country got carved up. The Syrian military, all of its systems, specifically the communication systems, are Russian built, and they were all jammed by the Russians during the war. And units in the front were being unable to speak to the rest. This is from people I know that are in the military, unable to speak to command. And also there was messages sent on these systems telling people to withdraw from certain locations and to surrender. Those were all orders under the Russian control, and those within the military that are patriotic and have, the special units specifically that were not impoverished and starving, Syrian soldiers were being paid $20 a month. And that was because of Russia's failure and Iran's failure also to actually step in and make sure that the economy and specifically the military is not impoverished in a situation where they both, as Russians and Iranians, were fighting for their own, future. Anyways, the Syrian military was disbanded at the orders of the Russians, and the elite units, all of them, actually crossed the border into Iraq. They refused to surrender. Right now, the elite units that were the Nimr or Tiger forces are, there's some remnants of them. We'll see what will happen.
So you're not the only person who has expressed the view that Russia did a deal of the nature you've just described. And I will tell you that this is a possibility I contemplated the moment I saw, the Syrian forces melt away with incredible rapidity. It just seemed that some kind of a deal, or maybe more than one deal, had been done, and that this was all being orchestrated pursuant to some kind of an undisclosed agreement amongst powers in the region. The problem I have with this particular interpretation of the events, Laith, is that, and this is why in the end I'm having difficulty believing that this is in fact what transpired, because it requires us to believe that the Russians trust the Americans. Okay, what has just happened is that under this interpretation of events, which is plausible, and let me also say that it wouldn't be out of character for Vladimir Putin to do such a thing, because Vladimir Putin has always prioritized the interests of the Russian state. He's never claimed to be in the business of, promoting democracy or human rights or self-determination in other countries. And for obvious reasons, Ukraine is of greater importance to Russia than Syria. So would he do a deal of that nature if he perceived it to be in the interests of the Russian Federation? I think he's capable of doing it. But I also think he's learned from experience that he can't trust the Americans as far as he can throw them. And under this interpretation of events, we would have to believe that he basically gave up Syria, because what's now happened to Syria is irreversible. Russia cannot reverse it. With all these forces controlling Damascus and the country, the Israelis coming in, the Turkish forces coming in, So he basically would have to believe that the Americans are going to keep their end of the bargain. I just don't think he would believe that at this stage. Doesn't that, in your own mind, raise a question about whether, in fact, that's the deal that was done?
Yeah, he doesn't have to trust them, obviously, to make the deal, because what the deal is that was proposed is that the United States will be stuck in killing Arabs and Muslims in West Asia for the next 10 years. That's a great deal for Russia. He believes that in those 10 years, he can be stronger even and undefeatable by the West. And just to be clear, I believe this is a strategic mistake, both for the Iranians and the Russians. These countries, Syria fought off the hordes, not because of only the support of the Iranians and the Russians in 2012 and in 2015, but because there was still a healthy Syria in terms of, people were not starving, and you could get free healthcare and free education, and you can fight. But after 2015, when the stagnation, 2016, so on, stagnation of all the fronts happened, and all the looted Syrian oil and gas and wheat and olives and olive oil and so on, all the destruction of the industrial base of north of Aleppo and the looting of the factories, when none of that was replaced by the Russians, temporarily at least, for 10 years almost, you had destroyed you had left the country ready to be bought off by somebody. You can't expect a whole generation of people to grow up in mass poverty, locked up from the world with no resources, no electricity, no nothing, 2 hours of electricity a day, and then expect them to fight back. And then when I hear some commentaries from some people, let's say, that support Iran or support Russia. Well, the Iranians, the Syrian government was corrupt, and the Iranians and Russians were sending some things, but it was getting sold on the black market or whatever it is, That's a cop-out also, comment, because, Lebanon is not a state. Is full of corruption. The West controls the government. And somehow still Iran found a way to make sure that the Shia population is not starving here, is weaponized, and can have an army within an army. Even if the Russians want to say, oh, the Syrian soldiers didn't want to fight. Well, you have an experience. Don't claim to me that you don't know this. They could have, the Russians and the Iranians, invested in a force of 30,000 only, paid them full professional salaries. And that 30,000 would have defended all of Syria. They could have done that. Again, these are all strategic mistakes. There is nobody can say to me that Syria fell by itself like that without a clear deal being made by the Russians. I think the Iranians got shocked that the Russians betrayed them this badly, but also the Iranians themselves have made huge mistakes over the last 14 months of, waiting for the blows on the axis in a defensive posture. Mm-hmm. And we're still all waiting for the truthful promise 3 that will never happen, it seems like.
Before we get there, I want to just ask you about Lebanon. I definitely want to ask you about True Promise 3. I saw an interview, given by Larry Johnson, former CIA officer, a few days ago, in which he was asked about what the loss of Syria means for the axis of resistance. And the operating assumption is that the flow of weapons from Iran to the Islamic resistance in Lebanon has now been definitively severed. And he said, I'm not so sure that's the case, because Iran can potentially find other ways to get weapons into Lebanon, albeit with considerably more difficulty. And one possibility he mentioned was smuggling routes. Now, if, as we've predicted, or certainly I have predicted, and I hope I'm very wrong about this, Syria descends into chaos, it becomes even more mired in poverty and desperation. It's not hard to imagine that people living in this area would be willing to assist Iran to deliver weapons to Lebanon by land in return for some compensation. And Iran is in a position to be able to finance the creation of smuggling routes. Do you think, whether by means of smuggling routes or some other means, Iran will try to continue supplying Hezbollah? And if so, do you think that they can do that successfully? Also, do you believe that Hezbollah has some local manufacturing capacity for its weaponry?
Yes, I think all of that is going to continue. Both the manufacturing here in Lebanon, which it does have, it has full factories for both drones and missiles, and the smuggling will continue. When is the last time any drug dealer had a problem smuggling anything in the world? Okay, I laugh sometimes with the U.S. talking about that wall with Mexico that is going to stop either the flow of migration and or drugs. It's like there's no place on earth that a drug dealer can get you something into. So yeah, you can get weapons anywhere you want to, and whether obviously that the more stable a society is, the more expensive it is, but you can do anything you want to if you have the money. And the Axis of Resistance has been smuggling weapons into Gaza for a decade or more now. And that's even more closed up, more controlled, more monitored society with enemies on all sides. So I don't think it's going to change anything. Yes, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but the question is that before we even think about those things, right now the Israeli military is pushing towards the international highway between Damascus and Beirut. They're just a few kilometers overlooking it from the hills of the Qaramun. And you remember how me and you, when we drove, it's like once you cross the border from Lebanon, it's 20 minutes, you're in Damascus. And on the other side, you're already in the Beqa Valley. You're like 20 minutes away from Baalbek, or half an hour away from Baalbek. So the Israelis can invade from there easily once they're taking the hills on top. So how long will the Israelis wait before they do whatever they want to? Because it's clear that the world now is letting them, the Western world at least, and all its proxies and vessels are letting it do whatever it wants to. There's 600 air raids on Syria over the last 3 days. Mm-hmm. You saw the videos of yesterday's attacks on Tartus. It looks like they're using tactical nukes. 3.5 on the Richter scale, the earthquake effect
were gigantic. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. That's based on the images that I saw. Yeah. So, by the way, what is happening in Lebanon? Has the mass murdering Zionist entity more or less respected the ceasefire in recent days, or does it continue to bombard Lebanon?
They withdrew from Al-Khiyam village yesterday, and today they decided to bomb the town square, and 3 civilians are injured. I don't know how severely, but just like for the hell of it. The Lebanese army deployed in the Khiyam. They're still bombing it. And yesterday there was an attack on a car on near the highway we took to the Beaufort castle. Just sat down from it. And so they're continuing to just target whoever they want to. There's drones every day in Beirut flying over us. where, there's not much time left in these 60 days. I mean, we're halfway through it. I guess it will bring us to Trump's inauguration, the end of those supposed 60 days, that the Israelis will be completely out of Lebanon, and I don't think they will leave. Why would they? They're bombarding the hell out of Syria, who's not at war now with them, who's controlled by one of their vessels. All the ministries, all the naval, air power, radars, intelligence, everything is destroyed in Syria. And they're occupying more of the country while they're not at war with Syria, the new Syria. So why would they do less in Lebanon?
Of course. And by the way, I want to point out that the Israelis readily admit that they're bombarding the hell out of Syria. I have not seen, when Assad was in power and they were bombing Syria, frequently the government would put out statements about the casualties caused by these attacks. And oftentimes it reported, whether the reports were accurate or not, I don't know, but it reported the number of civilians killed, if civilians were in fact killed. The reporting on this carpet bombing of Syria by Israel since the fall of Assad, I have not seen a single reference to civilian casualties in any of the Western media reports or the Israeli media reports about this, and there have been many. It's unthinkable when you look at the scale of the bombardment that they aren't killing significant, if not very large numbers of civilians. Do you know anything about the civilian? Do you have any information on the civilian casualties from these hundreds of bombardments that have taken place since the fall of Assad?
Yeah, well, last night, or this, attack on the Tartus region, that crazy video, there is around 6 villages just around that attack. Practically all the houses are no more windows, cracks in the walls, hundreds of injured. There's probably tens of casualties, but the Syrian civil defense, firefighters, whatever, they've been attacked by the Israelis. Also, they're not able to do their work. There's a raging fire in the mountain right now in the forests, and there's secondary explosions because they attacked, obviously, caches of ballistic missiles or what have you. So there's nobody that can go in to inspect, to stop the fire, to extract people. There's no state. But you could read the comments of people from the villages in the moments that, and you could see their videos, So this is happening all across Syria. And the other thing is that you remember when the Israelis were attacking Syria at the time of President Assad, the Syrian military and government would say they shot down 8 out of the 10 or 9 out of the 10 or whatever missiles and limited damage to certain air defenses and a few, let's say, civilians dead. People used to laugh at those comments. The Syrians keep on lying about their ability to shoot down Israeli. This is what people would claim. Well, now we see. What does it mean that Israel actually reaches its targets? The Syrian military and the Syrian air defenses were one of the best in the world, specifically the layered air defense systems of Syria were one of the best in the former, socialist third world. There's nobody else that had this many layers of air defense that were built over, 60-some years of sovereignty. And now that they're not there, Israel is hitting everything as it wishes. Finally, I would say one thing about the occupation of the Israelis in South Syria right now. They have currently expelled almost 100,000 Syrians from the areas that they occupied in the Qunaitra, South Damascus, and Daraa. Almost 100,000 people, and they're still going. The refugees of the Golan in 1967 were 150,000. that came to Syria from the Golan Heights. Syria is experiencing ethnic cleansing, demographic change at a scale we haven't seen since the Holocaust and or the Armenian genocide in terms of change of demographic outlook of a geography. And everybody's just in the West sitting and watching and doing nothing.
So let's talk about Iran, Laith. We talked about the air defenses. You just elaborated on that very important point. The destruction of Syrian air defenses is the complete annihilation of any and all military assets. Has stimulated a discussion in the Zionist colony about the ease with which Israel can now attack Iran, because basically the Israeli military, its air force, can operate freely in Syrian airspace, whereas before, operating in Syrian airspace was quite a challenge. So quite apart from that, of course, Netanyahu, this bloodthirsty war criminal, has been openly hankering for the destruction of Iran for 20 years. The incoming Trump administration is the most Zionist administration probably in the history of the United States. The Iranians have watched the destruction of Lebanon, the partial destruction of Lebanon, the complete dismembering of its ally Syria. Of course, worst of all, the utter obliteration of the population of Gaza, the mass murder of Palestinian children. Any sane leader of Iran at this stage, I would think, would be saying, we're next. They're coming after us next. And if I were sitting in their shoes, I would think that the only way to stop it, is the North Korea option, which is to finally develop a nuclear weapon. Do you think that that's the path that Iran is going to go down? And if not, what is Iran going to do next?
Yeah, I mean, if they don't declare that they have a nuclear weapon, they're next. And there's no two ways around it. I think there's a big problem in the way that the Iranians have been working in terms of their strategic planning. This idea that, I made a joke online on, I said, there used to be a meme that the anti-colonialists and the left would use. It says, Russia and Iran play chess, China plays Go, the United States plays tic-tac-toe. Well, it was to kind of look at this stupidity of Western foreign affairs or foreign policies. But in reality, what it was is that the Russians and the Iranians were playing chess, Chinese are playing Go, and the US was playing chicken. And they just drove over them and the table and crushed them. And that's what's the main. If Iran wants to calculate 10 moves ahead or 12 moves ahead like chess, they're going to be receiving punch after punch while they're still calculating what's the effects of their moves. And it may have made sense the first 6 months of the genocide in Gaza, that you want the whole world to see the Israelis committing genocide on live television and win the opinion, the public opinion square in the West. But then after 6 months, should have been very clear that that's not going to change anything, because the Western populace are neutered, are eunuchs that have not stood up for their own rights since the end of World War II. And that the West is violating international law and doesn't care about it and will rape you on live television and rape international law on live television. So in those conditions, the Iranians should have switched gear and went on the attack. And unfortunately, they didn't. And now they are going to be left alone. And an omen for the Chinese and the Russians, if the axis of resistance falls, there's no more BRICS. BRICS is India and Brazil, both captured by the West. It's worse than the EU formation in BRICS currently because of its inclusion of non-sovereign states. And one last thing I would say, the new government, quote unquote, in Syria, saying that they're not ready to fight the Israelis. They've been fighting for 15 years for Syria. They're openly saying they're ready to fight China to defend the Uyghurs. So they have the fight to fight China, but they don't have the fight to fight Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And Julani gave up on the Golan and actually sold it seems like. That's why he changed his name.
So do you think that the Iranians are finally going to wake up to the danger confronting them and take appropriate action to defend themselves? Or do you think they're going to continue to play chess while the other side plays chicken?
I can't tell anymore, honestly. There's many things over the last 14 years that have, 14 months, 14 years, yeah, but 14 months specifically that have now, I think anyone that tells us, including myself, anyone that can say what is going to happen for sure, because of the irrationality of everybody. I mean, I've been trying to analyze the Russians and the Iranians in a rational way. And I stopped trying to analyze the Americans or the Israelis. But now I'm going to give up on, because none of what the Russians did and or the Iranians in Syria makes any sense.
Right. The last thing I want to talk to you about today, Laith, is, of course, our brothers and sisters in Palestine. And I have to say that I've been very, I think a fair word is outraged by some of the commentary I'm seeing coming from people who are supporters of the Palestinian cause and have been for many years. And what incenses me is the sense of doom that seems to have overtaken them. And I'm going to, maybe it's unfair, but I'm going to single out one person in particular, who I think is still a very talented, knowledgeable analyst, and that's Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is saying that it's basically over for the Palestinians. And, once Trump comes into office, he's going to tell Sisi or somebody else, you've just got to take, the Palestinians who have survived in Gaza. We're going to empty Gaza and there's nothing you can do about it. And all of them are going to be shipped out of Gaza. And then they're going to ship out the Palestinians from the West Bank. Ritter's actually saying this. They're going to ship out the Palestinians from the West Bank, and the Palestinian nation is dead. The two-state solution is over. Now, I know that, he may. I don't think Scott Ritter is the kind of person who would ever tell you something he doesn't actually believe. He wouldn't express an opinion he doesn't actually hold. But I just think that's absurd, completely and utterly absurd. I have no doubt that the Israelis want to do that, but whether they can do that is another question altogether. I think that would be probably would cause an explosion that no one could control if they actually attempted to expel all Palestinians from the Gaza and the West Bank into Egypt, Jordan, or some other country in the region. I personally believe this is a setback for the Palestinians. It unfortunately means that their liberation is going to be delayed for some period of time. But I can't see this Zionist entity lasting much longer, if for no other reason than that. Really, there are two reasons fundamentally. The one is it's run by a bunch of lunatics. These people are insane. They're criminally insane. And no state run by the criminally insane can last very long. And secondly, the Zionist colony has power only because of the United States. It derives its power entirely from the United States, and the United States is an empire in rapid decline. And that process, when, for example, it is no longer deniable that NATO has had its ass handed to it in Ukraine, that is going to be a very serious blow to the power of the United States. It has major problems with the accumulation of debt. Its leaders are also completely and utterly irrational, divorced from reality. So when the empire declines, Israel's finished. So from my perspective, yes, Israel's ability to kill has been enhanced. The liberation of the Palestinians has been delayed, but this talk about, it's all over for the Palestinians, I reject unequivocally. I'm wondering how you're feeling about all of this.
Well, look, I think the main problem for all the Western analysts is their impetus to affect any change in their own countries. Okay. So Scott Ritter has zero effect on the American public changing the government, stopping wars in their name, killing and genociding on this planet. The Palestinian children in Gaza have more effect on the international order and the game and the future of American citizens and the American empire than Scott Ritter. So anything that I hear from a Western analyst, leftover, leftist, former soldier, whatever it is, criticizing the Palestinians or the Axis of Resistance or the Syrians and their thing, I see that as their frustration at their own impotence. Okay? So no, the Palestinian people have given hundreds of thousands of martyrs over the decades to stop Zionism and Western imperialism. Syria has lost, millions of martyrs since World War I, millions, to expel occupation and fight imperialism and help for the liberation of Palestine. So if Syria falls for a minute and they don't fight under those circumstances of starvation for 15 years and besiegement for 80, I don't blame the people of Syria. I am very sad at the fall of Syria, but I understand how somebody that grew up, especially over the last 15 years, can give up on the project of Syria. To see somebody on their knees, like the Syrian people, and to come and spit on them because you think you're revolutionary, or the Palestinian people, you spit on them, say, I give up, like George Galloway on Arabs. Who cares about what George Galloway can do to the Arabic people? Can he not get elected except on a by-election? Can he stop going on Big Brother, reality TV, meowing to women? That's not a model for liberation.
Yeah, I have to add my distaste and really contempt for the larger commentary I'm seeing about not just Palestinians, but Arabs. There really is, I can't think of a place in the world where the indigenous population in my lifetime has exhibited more resistance to Western imperialism than the Arab world. And the price they have paid has been utterly monstrous. And you think about the amount of munitions. Just in Gaza alone, in the last 14 months, they have dropped something like twice or three times as many bombs as were dropped in World War II on Dresden, Hamburg, and London combined. Okay, that's just Gaza in the last 14 months. You think about the bombs that have been dropped on Syria, on Iraq, on Yemen, on also the West Bank, and all of the bombs that were dropped before the genocide on Gaza, and the other parts of, Egypt has been bombarded in the post-World War II period by Western powers. Jordan has been bombarded by Western powers or its proxies in the post-World War II period. The amount of destructive power that has been brought to bear against the peoples of the region of West Asia, the indigenous peoples, far surpasses that of anything that has been done, I think even more so than World War II. So for us in the West to be sitting here judging the peoples of the region, Arabs, for failing to unite and to expel the Western imperialists from their lands is the height of hypocrisy. It's exactly what you said. Who in this region? One of the things that's most amazing, Laith, is that during this entire time that this genocide has been happening, I can't think of a single instance in which there was any armed resistance at all anywhere in the Western world to the policies, the genocidal policies of the Western governments. And all we do is talk about the threat of terrorism in the West. What terrorism? We don't know what terrorism is. We are the deliverers of terrorism. We are administering terrorism every day, every minute upon the peoples of West Asia, and we are in no position to judge them at all. And I hope that those words will resonate with some members of our audience. In any case, before we sign off, is there anything else you wanted to add, Laith? My heart goes out to the people of Syria. I know this is a very, very difficult time for you, and I want to give you the last word.
Yeah, look, we're coming upon Christmas. So if the viewers can be generous and go to www.freepalestine.video and donate, I want to say that we had an office in Damascus, and we employed 4 young men and women doing programming that you see on our sites. Our studios were raided and looted, and those that worked with us, we can't disclose their names. We don't want them to be even tracked because of the threat that could be to their life. So we've lost a large amount of money in terms of the equipment that was there, the editing equipment. So people, please donate, be generous. We're still employing 15 youth in the West Bank, Jordan, and Lebanon, working on the content, and we want to continue bringing you the voice of the people on the ground, not that is of any state and or that is liberal and not revolutionary, as we have been producing for the last year. Free Palestine video is the website. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Laith, and please stay safe. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal for Reason to Resist on December 16th, 2024.